Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The stale, antiseptic air of the hospital corridor seemed to thicken with every passing second, becoming a viscous substance that was increasingly difficult to breathe. It was a silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy, charged with the unspoken words that had hung between Jason Morgan and Drew Kane for years, a tangled web of rivalry, resentment, and a strange, fractured brotherhood forged not in childhood camaraderie but in the shared, horrifying experience of having their identities stripped away and repurposed. They stood as two pillars of a shared, painful history, one that was, unbeknownst to one of them, built upon a foundational lie of catastrophic proportions. Drew's face was a mask of weary impatience, etched with the fresh anguish of the evening's events. Danny Morgan, the bright, vibrant little boy they both considered a son, was lying in a hospital bed down the hall, having narrowly escaped a terrible accident. The shared terror for the boy's life had, for a fleeting moment, eclipsed their animosity. But now, in the cold, fluorescent glare of the hallway, that temporary truce was fraying at the edges. "What is it, Jason?" Drew's voice was gravelly, strained. "If you've got something to say, just say it. I need to get back to Scout, and I'm sure Sam is waiting for you." Jason stood rigid, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, the chasm below representing the utter destruction of the life he had so carefully, so desperately, rebuilt. His gaze was fixed on a nondescript point on the opposite wall, but he wasn't seeing the bland landscape painting or the fire extinguisher case. He was seeing the past, a chaotic montage of deception, loss, and a decision made in a moment of supreme desperation that had irrevocably altered the course of so many lives. "It's about Danny," Jason began, the words sounding foreign and leaden on his tongue. Drew's posture shifted from impatient to defensive. "What about him?" "He's going to be okay. The doctors said so. We were all lucky." "It's not about the accident," Jason interrupted, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through Drew's attempted reassurance. He finally turned his head, his piercing blue eyes meeting Drew's. The intensity in them was terrifying, a raw, unvarnished truth finally breaking through the surface after years of being buried. "It's about before. It's about who he is." A flicker of confusion crossed Drew's face. "Who he is?" "He's your son. He's Sam's son. He's Danny Morgan." Jason flinched as if struck. The name Morgan now felt like a brand of his own deceit. He shook his head, a slow, painful motion. "No. He's not." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all sound and reason from the space between them. Drew simply stared, his brain seemingly refusing to process the three simple, devastating words. "What are you talking about?" Drew finally managed, a hollow laugh escaping him. "Is this some kind of sick joke? Because if it is, it's not funny. Not after tonight." "It's not a joke," Jason said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing Drew to lean in slightly to hear him, a gesture that felt unbearably intimate given the context. "It's the truth. A truth I should have told you a long, long time ago." He took a shaky breath, the memories he had fought so hard to suppress now flooding him, threatening to pull him under. "Do you remember when we were held by that organization? After they pulled me from the water, after they made you into me?" Drew's expression darkened. "I try not to. But yes. I remember." Those months were a blur of disorientation, psychological torture, and a forced immersion into the life of a man he didn't know, all while his own identity was systematically erased. "It was during that time," Jason continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. They harvested from me my biological material. They told me it was for research, for their experiments. I didn't think much of it then, I was just trying to survive, to hold on to some shred of who I was." A cold dread began to creep into Drew's veins, a premonition of the horror to come. He remained silent, his eyes locked on Jason. "After we got out, after our lives started to diverge," Jason went on, "I found out they hadn't just stored it. They had used it. They implanted an embryo into a surrogate. An embryo that was created using my DNA. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Drew's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots, to find any other possible conclusion than the one that was slowly, horrifyingly, taking shape. An embryo? Who was the surrogate? What happened to the child? This was the moment. The point of no return. Jason's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck corded with tension. The surrogate's name was Sam. The name landed between them like a physical blow. Drew staggered back a step, his shoulder hitting the wall with a soft thud. Sam? Our Sam? You're telling me that you and Sam, that you had a child through a surrogate while you were both presumed dead? While I was living your life? The betrayal in his voice was scalding. No! It wasn't like that, Jason insisted, a desperate edge to his voice. Sam didn't know. Not at first. She was told it was a baby created from the man she believed was me, from you, Drew. She thought she was carrying your child. The world tilted on its axis for Drew. He remembered that time. He had been Jason Morgan then, living with Sam, building a life, a future. He remembered her pregnancy, the joy, the anticipation. He remembered the devastating stillbirth. The grief that had hollowed them both out. The loss of the child he had believed was his had been one of the most profound sorrows of his life. The baby died, Drew whispered, the old grief resurfacing with a fresh, sharp agony. We lost him. Sam went into labor, and the baby, he didn't make it. Jason shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, tears of guilt, of shame, of a long-carried burden. He didn't die, Drew. That's what we were told. What Sam was told. What you were told. But it was a lie. He pushed on, the full, ugly truth now tumbling out in a relentless, brutal torrent. The people who held us, the ones who created the embryo, they faked the stillbirth. They took the baby. They stole him. And they gave him to me. The air left Drew's lungs in a sudden, painful rush. He felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. He could only stare, his mind reeling, unable to form a single coherent thought. When I came back to Port Charles, when I was just me again, separate from you, I found out about the baby, Jason explained, his voice thick with emotion. I was told he was my biological son, conceived without my knowledge or consent, and that he was in danger. That the organization that created him wanted him back. I was given a choice, I could take him, hide him, and protect him as my own, or he would disappear forever into their world. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to tell the truth. Drew roared, the sound echoing in the silent hallway, his composure shattering into a million pieces. You were supposed to come to me. To Sam. That was our son. Mine and Sam's. He was my biological son. Jason shot back, a flash of his own defensive anger surfacing. Created from my DNA. And Sam, she had just gone through the trauma of believing she'd lost her child. How could I tell her that not only was her baby alive, but that he was mine, that he'd been stolen, and that the man she loved at the time, wasn't the father? It would have destroyed her. It would have destroyed you both. So you just, what? Decided to play God? Drew's voice was laced with a venomous fury. You took him? You let Sam mourn a child that was alive? You let me mourn a son that was, he couldn't even finish the sentence. The implications were too vast, too monstrous. I gave him a life. Jason insisted, his own voice rising in desperation. A safe life. A life where he was loved and protected. I raised him as my own. I am his father in every way that matters. You stole him. Drew countered, jabbing a finger in Jason's direction. You lied to everyone. To Sam, to me, to the entire world. You gave him your name, you built a family with the woman who gave birth to him, all while knowing the most fundamental truth of his existence was a lie. My son grew up calling you Dad while I was right here, grieving for him. The raw, gut-wrenching pain in Drew's cry seemed to finally deflate Jason's defensive anger. The fight went out of him, leaving behind only the naked, wretched truth. He slumped against the wall opposite Drew, the weight of his secret finally, fully, crushing him. "I know," Jason said, his voice barely audible. "I know what I did. And I have lived with the guilt of it every single day. Every time I looked at Danny, I saw the lie. Every time I held him, I felt the weight of what I had taken from you. From Sam. But I also saw my son. And I loved him. I love him more than anything in this world." He looked up at Drew, his expression one of utter devastation. "The accident tonight, when I thought I might lose him. I realized I couldn't carry this anymore. He deserves to know the truth. And you deserve to know your son." The words "your son" hung in the air, no longer an abstract, horrifying concept, but a concrete, life-altering reality. Drew's mind was a whirlwind, spinning back through the years. He thought of Danny, his bright smile, his curious nature, the way he looked at Jason with pure, unadulterated admiration. He had always felt a strange, powerful connection to the boy, a pull he could never explain, one he had attributed to his own complicated relationship with Jason and his love for Sam. Now, he understood. It was the primal, biological bond of a father to his child. He saw Danny's face in his mind's eye, and for the first time, he looked for himself. The shape of the eyes? The curve of the smile? He had always thought Danny favored Sam, but now, he saw echoes of his own features, of his late mother's, in the boy's face. How had he not seen it before? The truth had been hidden in plain sight, obscured by the colossal lie they had all been living. "All this time," Drew whispered, his voice cracking. "All this time, he was here. My son was alive. And you knew. You let me build a life, you let me have Scout, all while my firstborn son was living under my nose, being raised by another man." The comparison to his son, Scout, whom he loved more than life itself, made the betrayal even more profound. He had missed everything. The first breath, the first step, the first word. He had missed the sleepless nights and the chaotic, joyful days. He had missed the chance to be a father to his first child, a chance that had been stolen from him not by fate, but by the man standing in front of him. What about the initial lie? Drew asked, his mind snagging on another thread of the deception. The stillbirth. How was that even possible? In a hospital? With doctors? Jason let out a weary sigh, the intricate web of the conspiracy now having to be fully laid bare. It was Helena Cassadine. She was involved with the organization. She had her people everywhere. The doctor who delivered Danny, the nurses, they were all on her payroll. They orchestrated the entire thing. They took him, they presented Sam and you with a stillborn child, and they gave him to me. It was all part of some twisted, long game she was playing. Helena Cassadine. The name was like a curse in Port Charles, a specter of evil that reached beyond the grave. Of course she was involved. It was a revelation that somehow made the entire, sordid story more believable, and yet, infinitely more horrifying. Drew pushed himself off the wall, his body trembling with a volatile mixture of shock, grief, and a rage so pure it was blinding. He took a step toward Jason, his hands curling back into fists. The desire to lash out, to physically expel the torrent of agony inside him, was overwhelming. You had no right, he seethed, his voice trembling with the effort to control himself. No right to make that decision for all of us. You took my son. You took him from Sam. You let her live with that grief, that trauma, for years. Do you have any idea what that did to her? To me? We fell apart because of that loss. I thought I was protecting him. Jason's plea was desperate now, the justification sounding feeble even to his own ears. I thought I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself. Drew accused, his finger pointing accusingly once more. You saw a chance to have a son, a family with Sam, and you took it, no matter the cost. You didn't care about the wreckage you left behind. You didn't care that you were obliterating my life, my chance to be a father. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The images were too much. Sam, sobbing in his arms after the stillbirth. The tiny, empty nursery. The slow, painful dissolution of their relationship under the weight of that shared sorrow. And all the while, Jason had their son. He was raising him, loving him, building the life that should have been Drew's. Does Sam know? Drew asked, the question a deadly calm in the storm of his emotions. He turned back to face Jason, his eyes narrowed. Does she know the truth now? Jason hesitated, and that single moment of pause told Drew everything he needed to know. She found out, Jason admitted quietly. A while ago. She was devastated. Angry. It nearly destroyed us. It's why we've been so fractured. We've been trying to rebuild, to figure out how to move forward for Danny's sake, but the lie, it's always there. This new layer of betrayal was a fresh knife to Drew's heart. Sam knew. And she had kept the secret, too. The two people he had once considered the central pillars of his life, the woman he had loved and the brother who was his mirror image, had conspired, even if reluctantly on Sam's part, to keep his own son from him. The isolation he felt in that moment was absolute. He was an island, completely cut off from the mainland of truth and trust. So, I'm the last to know, Drew stated, the words flat, devoid of all emotion. It was a statement of fact, and somehow, that made it worse. The fool, walking around in the dark while everyone else knew the most important truth of my life. I wanted to tell you, Jason said, but the words were empty, a script he had rehearsed in his own head for years but never had the courage to follow through on. Don't, Drew cut him off, his voice cold and final. Don't you dare tell me you wanted to tell me. You had years, Jason. Years. You watched me bond with Scout, you saw the father I am to him, and you still kept my firstborn son from me. There is no justification for that. None. The two men stood in the hallway, the chasm between them now an uncrossable abyss filled with the wreckage of Jason's secret. The shared concern for Danny, which had momentarily united them, was now completely obliterated, replaced by a new, more painful dynamic. They were no longer rivals or brothers. They were the biological father and the man who had raised his son, connected by a little boy who was blissfully unaware that his entire world was about to be torn apart. What happens now? Drew asked, his voice hollow. The fury was receding, leaving behind a vast, empty landscape of grief. What do we tell Danny? Hey, kid, the man you've called dad your whole life stole you from me, so I'm your real father now? How does that work, Jason? How do we possibly fix this? Jason had no answer. He had been so focused on the act of confession, on the monumental task of finally speaking the truth aloud, that he had given little thought to the catastrophic aftermath. There was no blueprint for this, no guide on how to untangle a lie of this magnitude. I don't know, Jason admitted, the words a stark confession of his own powerlessness. I just knew I couldn't keep lying. Not after tonight. He has to know. And you have a right to be in his life. Drew let out a short, bitter laugh. A right? You think you can grant me a right to my own son? That's not how this works. You don't get to be the magnanimous hero here, Jason. You are the villain of this story. You will always be the man who stole my son. He took a step closer, his eyes blazing with a final, searing pronouncement. I will get to know my son. I will be in his life. But understand this, I will never, ever forgive you for this. Whatever fragile truce we had, whatever thin thread of brotherhood was left, it's gone. You are dead to me. With that, Drew turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps echoing with a grim finality down the sterile hospital corridor. He didn't look back. He couldn't. To look back was to see the ghost of the last 8 years, a phantom life that had been stolen from him. Jason remained, alone in the hallway, the weight of Drew's words pressing down on him like a physical force. You are dead to me. He had expected anger, rage, even violence. But the cold, absolute finality in Drew's tone was worse. It was an eternal sentence. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold, linoleum floor, his head in his hands. The truth was out. The burden was shared. But instead of feeling relief, he felt only a deeper, more profound despair. He had confessed to save his soul, but in doing so, he had unleashed a hell that would consume all of them, himself, Drew, Sam, and most importantly, an innocent little boy named Danny, whose understanding of family, of fatherhood, of his own identity, had just been irrevocably shattered. The confession was over, but the real storm was only just beginning. The fight for Danny's heart, for his place in his son's life, and for the very definition of what it means to be a father, was now a war on the horizon, and the first, devastating battle had just been lost in a quiet hospital hallway. The truth had set nothing free, it had only built a new, more complicated prison for them all. Jason Morgan had been through a lot in his life, but nothing compared to what he was facing now. The secret that had haunted him for months was finally about to destroy everything. The silence that hung between him and Drew Kane inside the Metro Court's private lounge was suffocating. Drew's piercing eyes searched Jason's face, waiting for him to explain why he'd asked for this private meeting. Jason's jaw tightened, his blue eyes shadowed with regret. He had avoided this for too long. "Drew, there's something I have to tell you," Jason began, his voice low but steady. "And it's not something I ever wanted to say like this." Drew folded his arms, already bracing himself. "I'm listening," he said cautiously. "But if this has to do with Carly, Sonny, or the mob, save it. I'm done with that life." Jason shook his head, his throat tightening. "It's not about them. It's about Danny." Drew's eyes flickered at the mention of his nephew, or so he thought. "Danny? What about him? Is he okay?" Jason hesitated, the words refusing to come out. He could still hear Sam's voice echoing in his head, warning him not to say anything. But too much had happened. Too many lies. "Danny's fine," Jason said softly. "But there's something you need to know about him. About where he really comes from." Drew frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Sam and I already know the story. He's your son, Jason. He always has been." Jason exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, Drew. He's not." Drew blinked in confusion, his brow furrowing. "What the hell are you saying?" Jason's chest tightened as he finally forced out the truth he'd buried for so long. "Danny isn't my biological son," he said quietly. "He's yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Drew's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He stared at Jason as if he hadn't heard him right. "You want to run that by me again?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Danny is my son?" Jason nodded slowly, the weight of his confession sinking deep into his gut. "Yes. He's your biological son. I found out months ago, but I didn't know how to tell you." Drew pushed away from the table, pacing back and forth as his mind tried to catch up. No, that's not possible," he muttered. "Sam told me, everyone told me, that when I came to town, Danny was already yours. You were the father." Jason ran a hand through his hair, his voice rough with guilt. "That's what we all believed. But the truth got buried during the memory transfers, the switch, everything that happened when we were fighting to figure out who was who. The original DNA test was manipulated." Drew turned sharply. "By who?" he demanded. "Who would do something like that?" Jason hesitated. "Helena Cassadine." The name alone made Drew's blood boil. "Of course," he said bitterly. "Helena couldn't leave well enough alone." "But how do you even know this?" Jason swallowed hard. "I found a file in her old archives, one that was recovered when we took down Victor. It included medical records, the original paternity tests, and lab notes. They all pointed to you, Drew. Danny was conceived when you were with Sam, before the switch was fully exposed. You're his biological father." Drew's world spun. His mind flashed back to the time he spent with Sam, the warmth they shared before everything fell apart, before Jason returned and upended their lives. "So, all this time," Drew whispered, barely able to form the words. All this time, I've been walking around thinking I lost my family, thinking I was nothing to Danny but a memory, and he's been mine all along? Jason nodded again, his eyes full of remorse. I should have told you sooner. I didn't because I didn't want to hurt Sam or confuse Danny. But you have a right to know. You're his father. Drew's anger began to boil beneath the surface. He slammed his hand on the table, making Jason flinch. You knew for months and said nothing? You looked me in the eye, worked beside me, watched me talk about Danny, and you said nothing? Jason's voice cracked. I didn't know how, Drew. Sam was terrified of what this would do to Danny. She thought it would destroy him to find out that everything he believed was a lie. Drew scoffed. And what about me, Jason? Did anyone care what it would do to me? I've lost everything, my wife, my memories, my family, and now I find out my son has been living under your name? Jason stood up, his tone firm but full of sorrow. I didn't do this to steal him from you. I love that kid, but I'd never lie to you like that if I didn't have to. When I first saw the proof, I couldn't believe it either. I had to verify it. I went to GH. I had Spinelli check the files. It's real, Drew. There's no question, Danny is your biological son. Drew's breathing quickened as the emotions he'd buried for years began to surface. You think I care about the proof? I care that my son has been growing up believing you're his father. That I missed birthdays, milestones, all of it. You and Sam got to play house while I was fighting for my life. Jason's voice softened. You're right. And I can't undo that. But now you can be there for him. You can finally have what you were robbed of. Drew turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him, a man who'd lost so much, now realizing part of what he'd longed for was still within reach. You should have told me sooner, he said bitterly. Just then, the door opened. Sam stood there, pale as a ghost. You told him, she said quietly, her eyes darting between the two men. Jason looked guilty, while Drew's expression hardened. Yeah, Drew said, his voice trembling with fury. He told me. You want to tell me why you kept this from me too, Sam? Sam stepped forward, her voice shaking. Because I was trying to protect Danny. You don't know how hard it was, Drew. Everything got so messy when Jason came back. The tests, the memories, the lies, I didn't know what to believe. By the time I figured out the truth, Danny already saw Jason as his father. I couldn't just rip that away. Drew's eyes filled with tears. You didn't even give me the chance to know him. You made that choice for both of us. Sam's voice broke. I was scared, Drew. I didn't want to confuse him. He just started to feel safe again after everything that happened with Shiloh. I thought keeping things as they were was best. Jason tried to intervene, but Drew snapped, Stay out of this, Jason. You had your chance to tell me. Now it's her turn. Sam's lips quivered. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I should have told you. But I didn't want to hurt either of you. Drew shook his head, tears streaming down his face. You already did. You took away my right to be a father. And now, how am I supposed to look at Danny and tell him who I really am? Jason's voice was heavy with emotion. You start by being honest. He deserves the truth, no matter how hard it is. Sam sank into a chair, her voice small. Danny loves you both. You're both part of his life. But biologically, yes, Drew, he's yours. The room went silent again. The sound of Drew's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He couldn't think straight. He wanted to hate both of them, but part of him also felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. I want to see him, Drew said finally. I want to talk to him. But I won't blindside him. Not like this. He's been through enough. Jason nodded. I'll let you handle it however you want. I'm not standing in your way. Sam looked up, tears glistening. He still loves you, Jason. You're his hero. That won't change. Jason gave a faint nod. I know. But maybe it's time Danny knows who his father really is. He deserves to have both of us in his life. Drew let out a deep breath. That's what I want too. I don't want to take him from you, Jason. But I won't let him live a lie anymore. Hours later, Drew stood outside Sam's penthouse, his hands trembling as he knocked on the door. Danny opened it, smiling. Hey, Uncle Drew. Mom's not here right now, but you can come in. Drew's voice wavered. Hey, buddy. Mind if I hang out for a bit? Danny nodded enthusiastically. Sure. I was just working on my robotics project. Wanna see? Drew smiled faintly, his heart swelling as he watched the boy chatter excitedly about his invention. Every word, every laugh, hit Drew like a tidal wave. He saw himself in Danny, the same curiosity, the same intensity. For the first time, he realized just how much he'd missed. Later that night, Drew stood by the window, watching the city lights. Jason joined him outside the penthouse, silently leaning against the wall. He's a great kid, Drew said quietly. Yeah, Jason agreed. He's the best thing I've ever had in my life. And now he gets to know where he really comes from. Drew nodded slowly. I still don't know how to tell him. Jason looked at him with quiet strength. You'll know when it's time. Just be ready for questions. He'll want to know why we kept it from him. Drew sighed. I'll take the blame. He deserves to know I wasn't there for him, not because I didn't want to be, but because I didn't know I could be. Jason placed a hand on Drew's shoulder. You're a good man, Drew. Danny's lucky to have you. Drew met his brother's gaze, a fragile peace forming between them. We're both lucky to have him, he said softly. For the first time in a long time, there was no resentment, just shared pain, and a hope for healing. Meanwhile, Sam stood inside, watching them from the window. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she realized that the truth she'd fought so hard to bury was now setting everyone free. Danny had two fathers who loved him more than anything, and for the first time, she believed they could all find a way forward. But in true Port Charles fashion, nothing stays quiet for long. Elsewhere, Alexis received an anonymous envelope containing copies of Helena's lab results, the same ones Jason had found. Someone wanted the truth out publicly. Someone who knew this secret could blow apart more than just one family. And as the night deepened, the camera pulled back from the penthouse, leaving the brothers standing together under the moonlight, two men bound by fate, blood, and the son who would change everything.